Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I am talking about Paddington in Peru, the latest in the Paddington film franchise. That's a collectible I had since the first Paddington film came out on Blu-ray. It was like a collectible set where you got a Paddington plush with it. So, very cute little collectible in my collection there. But in this video, though, you guys, I am going to be talking about the new Paddington film, which is titled Paddington in Peru. This is the third installment in the Paddington live action franchise, with the UK getting these films first and then the US getting these second. So that's why we've been getting these films kind of at weird times of the year. I think the first two films were in January, and then this one we got recently over Valentine's Day weekend here in the US. So who knows what the fourth Paddington film will entitle, but in Paddington, Peru, though, you guys, we do follow the Brown family again, like we did in the first two films. Paddington is living with them, and this time around, they want to take a trip to Peru. They've always kind of wanted to go there. That's where the Paddington Bear originally came from, and they always kind of wanted to see, the country where Paddington originated from. And when they get there, obviously the Paddington Bear is most excited to see his Aunt Lucy. And when they get to what they thought was her retirement home, he finds out that Aunt Lucy has gone missing, and so they have to go on a search for her. And so obviously the search gets kind of complicated. They meet a seaboat captain that's willing to help them out at first, but then things kind of go off the wires with him. They get lost in the jungle. All these different mishaps happen. Weird kind of details come to fruition and come to the spotlight about as to what exactly why she did go missing and what the circumstances were and how she went missing. And all these things are explored over the course of Paddington and Peru, of Paddington hoping to find his Aunt Lucy and make sure that she's back to the retirement home safe and sound. But overall, guys, I thought Paddington in Peru was a good film. It's not a great film. And keep in mind, I really, really liked those first two Paddington films. I thought the first one was absolutely terrific. Nobody saw it coming that it was going to be as great as it was. I remember seeing it in a packed theater on opening weekend. And I, along with many other people, were very surprised as far as just how great the film was. It wasn't just a good live action Paddington adaptation, it was just a great film overall. It was a great film about the Paddington Bear being among people and how to behave among people and how to teach things from his own culture and bring that to the human people. In Paddington, Peru, and for some even managed to surpass the first film. I really, really enjoyed Paddington 2. Even on certain days, I might even prefer to watch that one over the first one. But I know a lot of friends and family that really, really liked that second Paddington film. It definitely even has like a Wes Anderson kind of flavor to it. Terrific movie. And now we have Paddington in Peru. And what's kind of complicated about this movie is we don't have Paul King as the director back. And that was the person that gave us the first two Paddington films, though he is credited as a producer and a co-writer for this movie. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, that's just not the same as directing the movie, because the director gets to call all the creative shots here. A director by the name of Dougal Wilson took his place this time, and he apparently has done a lot of music videos and commercials leading up to his directorial debut with Paddington in Peru here. Not a bad director necessarily, but the thing with the Paddington films and why they've been so successful so far is they are Paul King's movies. And when you feel his absence, you can really, really feel his absence. And I think that's something that Paddington Peru kind of suffers from. But I do want to go over some positives and negatives as to why I enjoyed the film overall, but what some negatives as to why this easily is the weakest of the franchise. And if they do make a Paddington 4, I think it's very crucial that we do get Paul King back as the director. So for my positives and negatives of this movie, first and foremost, one thing that Dougal Wilson does keep in this film that I'm glad he kept that going for Paul King is the strong visual flair of the first two films. It's a very visually well-made movie. It's visualized very well. There's scenes where we don't just see, Paddington board a plane or anything. It's visually told in the sense that it's kind of an afterthought. It's just kind of, a small mishap of, Paddington learning where his flotation device is, and obviously he takes that literally. And just the plane is done in stop motion, and there's certain CGI elements added in. When a character is daydreaming or imagining something, we do get to see the little thought bubble like we would in like a comic book or something. And so that visual flair from those first two films carries over into this film. And once again, it's a very delightful thing to see in a Paddington film. I also thought a lot of the beloved Paddington story elements from the first two films, specifically Paddington getting into mischief on accident, is also carried over here. There's a lot of scenes where Paddington kind of unintentionally causes some mischief, whether it's in an environment or among people or pushing something over that was very fragile. All that stuff that you loved from the first two films as far as Paddington's behavior goes is carried over into this film. It's very adorable, very cute, very delightful. And I am glad that a lot of those Paddington story elements from those first two films carried over into this third film as well. I also like how the film does explore Paddington's origins just a little bit more. We do get to learn a little bit about his origin and how his aunt found him and kind of some things that he had going on. And even Paddington kind of had to rediscover about himself from a cub. And so we do get to see Paddington's origin a little bit more. So I thought that was very delightful to see in this movie, is seeing a little bit more about Paddington and kind of where he came from. There's also some fun things that happen in the end credit sequences of this movie. It happens during the credits and in a post-credit scene. There's also kind of a fun little character that you might remember from an earlier Paddington film that shows up here to kind of do a fun little shtick, if you will. I won't say who it is because this is a spoiler-free review. But there is something fun in the end credit sequence I thought was a lot of fun, and specifically characters that we were introduced to in the third act. So I thought that was pretty fun to witness here as well. Antonio Banderas and Olivia Colman play new characters here. Both are very fun. Antonio Banderas is kind of this handsome sea captain that has kind of this dark background about him where, Paddington has to be careful. Otherwise, Antonio Banderas can hurt him on accident or, do something really bad to him. And then with Olivia Colman, there's kind of something suspicious about her the whole time, and you'll find out about it in the third act what exactly is going on with her. But she has kind of this really cheerful attitude, and she's kind of always upbeat and wanting to do things in musical number. Very fun character to watch. I thought the two of them were great additions to the Paddington universe and great overall characters into this new Paddington story also. And I also do like how the Paddington franchise is carrying forward with being inspired by the work of Wes Anderson. There is a lot of dollhouse shots. There is a lot of keeping up with the family members, finding out what each of them are doing in rooms or doing at their jobs or doing in the day-to-day life, similar to how Wes Anderson seems to handle that with his main characters of his film, specifically if it's a film involving an entire family of characters. So I do like how Paul King and now Dougal Wilson as well are inspired by the work of Wes Anderson and are bringing some of that visual flair and directing style into the Paddington universe. And I think this film franchise overall is benefiting from a very Wes Anderson flavor to it. But for my negatives of Paddington and Peru, unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, this film does have some of the weakest ideas of the franchise. Though on paper, I think it is a good idea to have Paddington back in Peru, have him do a jungle adventure, have him learn a little bit more about his origin. All that stuff sounds great on paper, but as an execution goes for this movie, and specifically with Paul King not returning as director to kind of supervise this idea a little bit more. Like I said, I know he was producer and co-writer on this, but unfortunately, directing is kind of the big enchilada as far as responsibilities go. I just thought overall some of the ideas just felt the weakest, and some of the stronger ideas could have felt better in execution. Doing a jungle adventure with Paddington is a wonderful idea, but if your execution's kind of lame, it doesn't really help your idea and make it very strong at all. So I thought that aspect of the film was a little disappointing. Overall, too, I thought this was the least funniest of the three Paddington films. I thought the first two Paddington films had great humorous scenes in them. They had some really funny scenarios to put the Paddington character in. There's a couple of them in here in this movie, but overall, it just felt the least funniest. It just didn't feel as impactful as those first two films did. And like I mentioned earlier, clearly Paul King did not come back to direct this. I think some of his charm, the way he puts characters in and out of frame, the way he transitions from scene to scene, just some small details that you saw in those first two Paddington films felt missing here. Though the visual flair came back, it's quite clear that Paul King didn't come back as director. And I really hope if they do decide to make more Paddington projects like they've announced already, they really kind of need him, I think, to do that. It's perfectly fine if they want to continue this franchise. I think it has to be clearly under Paul King's direction because he's kind of the only person that I think truly understands Paddington the best out of everybody. And overall, too, I thought the overall jungle adventure felt kind of generic. Of course, the boat crashes. Of course, they get into trouble. Of course, they encounter certain people from certain tribes. Of course, they counter bandits. Of course, they're going to look for people that are going to look for treasure for the wrong reasons. There's all the stuff that you would just assume a jungle adventure like this would be like. And more than likely, if you thought about it before the film started, it's probably going to be in this film too. And they just don't do it in a very inspired way. So I thought that aspect of the story was a little disappointing as well. I also thought they could have, and this is more just one thing I hope they do moving the franchise forward. I think they really need to keep Paddington in London and around people in a social environment because there is a lot of sequences where it's just Paddington wandering around in the jungle with not a lot of people around, specifically just his family mostly for when it does come to other human characters. And I think I just like him overall in the London environment. It's just the most fun seeing him there. It is very cute when he gets kind of mischievous in unintentional ways. I think that's where the humor and the tone of this franchise is clearly at its best. And when you put him in a jungle, when you put him away from people, it doesn't allow the Paddington character to be as cute and adorable and as funny as we would like him to be. And then my last negative, or two more negatives actually. I thought there was a group of characters introduced in the third act, and I won't spoil what it is, but they kind of came off as a little annoying to me. So if they do move the franchise forward, I really hope that this group of characters doesn't come back because I found them a little annoying, unfortunately. For those who've seen the film and have seen the third act in full, you're going to know what I'm talking about too. And overall, too, this film felt the most predictable and the most formulaic to me. It did kind of have like a copy and paste feel to it. Like they took the first two Paddington films, just added kind of a jungle vibe to it, put it in Peru instead of London. And overall, too, I felt like I predicted the whole story before this film even started. And there was one character in particular where beat for beat, I could tell exactly what was going on with her character. In which, by the time the film was over with, almost every guess I had about this character came true, unfortunately. But overall, I'm going to give Paddington in Peru an 8 out of 10. I think it's a good film, like I said at the beginning of this review. It's just not a great film. It really needed Paul King's special touch to make it, fly and be great. I think if you like the first two Paddington films, I think you'll have just enough fun here. Otherwise, I think you could just wait to rent this one, to be completely honest. I don't think you need to skip it completely. I don't think it's that bad. But at the same time, if you're not a huge Paddington fan, even if you thought the first two films were fun, but you were kind of over and done with them already, I don't think you need to continue on to this third one. It's not going to change your mind about anything. But if you absolutely love the first two Paddington films like I did, I think this film's at least worth one view, just to kind of get it over and done with, see what you thought of it. Like I said, it's a fun little movie. I just hope that Paul King has more creative control moving forward with this franchise. I think this franchise clearly belongs in his hands moving forward. 8 out of 10 for me. I enjoyed Paddington in Peru. I would say see it if you're a hardcore Paddington fan. If not, I would just say to wait to rent this one or see when it's available to watch for free at some point. So it's 8 out of 10 for me. It's a good movie.